So nice to see everybody this evening. So some of you know that as an AESD, we are members of a national association that serves educational service agencies, or ESDs, is what we call ourselves in our state, across the country. And I have the pleasure to represent Washington State and the Western region of the United States on the AESA Executive Council. And as part of that council, I've had the privilege to get to know both Joan and Noelle and learn about their work. As a resource tonight, we're going to put links to a national overview of ESAs and the AESA annual report in the chat box for you to peruse later at your own time. Those documents can also be found on our AESD website under meeting materials. So by way of introduction, Joan is a lifelong educator with over 30 years of service in public education. She began serving as an executive director for the Association of Educational Service Agencies almost 5 years ago, July 1st, 2016. Dr. Wade began her career as a library media specialist in Montello, Wisconsin. And after attending graduate school, she served in various administrative capacities in Wisconsin school districts, serving as a technology coordinator for Portage Community School District and a distance learning director for CESA 5. We are also thrilled to have Noelle from AASA join us. Noelle joined AASA in 2007 as a policy analyst. As an associate executive director, she directs the advocacy and governance efforts of AASA. And in this role, she spearheads the organization's work with Congress and the U.S. Department of Education. Her team is responsible for representing the voice and priorities of the nation's public school superintendents in all aspects of federal education policy, and uses member networks, outreach, policy analysis, and surveys and research to advance the work. So please join me in welcoming both Joan and Noelle with us this evening.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that introduction, and it's always good to be with our friends from the state of Washington. And I know Noelle feels the same way. So I'm just going to kick you off for a few minutes. Many of you aren't aware of AESA, and so I want to just tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do for you as our members. And then I'm going to kick it off to Noelle because she has so much to tell you about what is going on in Washington, D.C. There's been a lot of activity with the Congress and the American Recovery Act, among other federal legislation that she's going to want to touch base on. But for those that aren't aware of the Association of Educational Service Agencies, we are the only national association for ESDs that links together members with each other. We really do three things for our members. We do thought leadership. So we try to keep you on the cutting edge of what's coming down the pike. So as you're developing services for your school districts, you have a network of people to talk to about what is going on across the country and how are other people doing services for their members. So really that thought leadership is an important part of what we bring to you. The second thing we do for our members is networking. So we'll network you together through our conferences. We hold 3 conferences a year. One, our summer leadership conference, our federal advocacy conference in September, and then our annual conference in December. And a lot of you have been to our federal our national conference in December. We also network you together on our community website. So you can, as part of your membership, connect with other ESDs and ESAs, educational service agencies across the country at no cost to you. And when your organization belongs to AESA as a member, everyone in that organization is a member. It's not just the superintendent, but it's all your employees and all the board members that can connect using our network. So that's the second thing we do for you. The third thing we do for you, and that's bringing Noelle to you, is federal advocacy. And you play a very, very important role in federal advocacy, just like you do with your state legislature. I'm a former legislator myself. I served in the Wisconsin State Assembly for 3.5 years. I know the importance of hearing from our constituents. Your voice is very, very important to your state legislature, to your state Department of Ed. Your voice is very, very important to Congress. And even when you think you're just a small fish in a big pond in Congress, I know Noelle will tell you your voice is much more important than any of our voices. So it's important that you develop those relationships and stay connected to those Congress people. There's a whole lot more that I could tell you about AESA, but I know we don't have time and our time is really limited. So I hope I can come back. Actually, I hope I can come back when it's in person and you have warmer weather than we do back here in Wisconsin and Minnesota. But I'm happy to come back virtually as well. So with that, I will tell you that Noelle Ellison-Ning does the advocacy for AASA, the Superintendent's Association, but she also does it for AESA, and her and I stay very closely connected to push the agenda for the educational service agencies from across the country. Noelle has a very good connection in Washington, D.C., and her team really represents us well. I'm not going to do any more of taking up your time, Noelle. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you give the federal advocacy update.
Great. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, for the introduction, and again, Joan, the transition from your comments on what AESA does to support the individual service centers. So just so I can prove my street cred, I taught high school special ed for a hot minute at an ESA in New York. I'm from upstate New York, and I taught at the OC and BOCES. My mom has taught there. My brother did his entire K12 experience in an ESA setting. So they are near and dear to my heart. So the most important thing here as we talk through the quick moment that we have together is go ahead and put your questions that you may have in the chat. After I end with the slides that I have tonight, I'm going to drop my email address right in the chat box. One of the most important things to know, Joan already alluded to it, is the power of your voice. And so I want to go off script to first highlight the importance of your voice. I think particularly as it relates to federal advocacy and federal legislation, it can seem really tangential and very removed because there's actually, outside of a year like this, where there's so much attention on education at the federal level, it's typically pretty slow outside of annual appropriations. And it can either feel like a fire hose of, well, there's so much going on, why would I even weigh in? Or where do I even start? So let me highlight what happened this summer. It is an excellent case study. It wrote the book on why member advocacy matters. So just a quick show of hands. Over the summer, how many of you received any of the approximately 25 emails I sent related to equitable services and Betsy DeVos's flawed interpretation? How many of you took time to write a comment, call your member of Congress, sign on to a letter, send a text or an email? It could have taken you 2 minutes. It could have taken you 10 minutes. And I think sometimes people wonder, well, does that really matter? It absolutely did, to the tune of $1.3 billion. Member advocacy from the grassroots level, superintendents, school boards, teachers, educational service agencies created a huge groundswell. And it was coupled with not one, not two, but 3 court decisions that inverted and gutted the egregious interpretation that she tried to ram through. So if you wondered if that 5 minutes really mattered, it did. You helped protect more than $1 billion in ed funding for public education. And that's dollars that remain in the public schools that presumably can be available for school districts to access services and supports that they either might buy directly or oftentimes in coordination through services and supports that you offer. So your advocacy matters, and thank you. The other thing is I'm going to put my email address in the chat because it is an explicit member benefit of belonging to your Washington ESD, your state affiliate, as well as AESA. I am your hired lobbyist. It is my job to support you in advocacy. So if you have a question, if you need top line talking points, if you want a blank presentation, like really not pretty, just the words so you can customize it, I'm happy to get that to you and willing to do that with over email, super easy peasy. Now, that's not what we came here for. To the originally scheduled content, what I'm going to use my overview on is walking through the available funds and allowable uses. And I think the most important thing to lead with here is that unfortunately, we were not in a position where we were able to get Congress to provide funding that goes directly to educational service agencies. I heard from Joan and the Legislative Committee and the state execs immediately after CARES 1, because funding flowed directly to local school districts via Title I share, but nothing explicit for educational service agencies. And in fact, in CARES 1 and CARES 2, the only real way to get funding directly to an ESA was through the governor's fund. And that meant you would have to do a hard court press in your own state with the governor to get them to include educational service agency in the broad bucket that was termed at the federal level other educational organizations. We did try to get ESAs written into CARES 2 and the American Recovery Act, American Recovery Plan, to no avail. And so as we look at the insane amount of funding that will be moving to and through the local level, while there is not funding directly to ESAs, I think it is extremely critical to highlight both for your state agencies and your local agencies, so managing up and down, the economies of scale that you can provide, your ability to coordinate and collaborate services, supports, content, mitigation strategies, to become a clearinghouse of best practices, to allow school districts to staff up on positions they might not be able to afford on their own. And it's stuff that ESAs are uniquely positioned to do. And to highlight the very collaborative nature between AASA and AESA that Joan kicked off with, AASA had a COVID-19 task force, and that we just recently put that to bed now that we have hopefully turned a corner. We had a Learning 2025 Commission where we just published the white paper, and we are turning now to the COVID working group, which is really the technical assistance, insights, analysis, and application of actually investing and implementing the COVID dollars. And my boss, Dan Dominich, was very clear that he wanted to make sure Joan was a part of that, given the importance and opportunity that ESAs represent as it relates to cooperative and collaborative purchasing. So Joan and a few ESAs from around the nation will be part of that working group that will be moving forward throughout the year. So in terms of available funds and what's flowing to the K12 districts that you support, there's CARES 1 and CARES 2. Think of these as sisters, right? So I'm going to talk about the three basic pots of funding that have funding dedicated to K12, and they're all in the same family. But as a quick way to keep them straight, I like to refer to CARES 1 and CARES 2 as sisters, so a lot of the same genetic material. And then the American Rescue Plan is a cousin. So pretty similar, but some important differences in a different immediate family. So when you look at CARES 1, we had $13.23 billion that was flowing through the SEAs via Title I formula. There's a 10% set aside at the state for their activities and administration, but 90% goes to local education agencies for multiple uses, including broad flexibility under ESEA, the special education law, the adult literacy law, career and technical education, Perkins, McKinney-Vento, and homeless education. These funds remain available for obligation through September of 2022. The second pot of funding, which came at the very end of last calendar year, December of 2020, was nearly a fourfold increase, with $54.3 billion. And again, this is very much a sister program. So it flowed once again all the way to the local level based on Title I proportions. It had the same set aside for states of 10%, the same allowable uses down to the local level for the 90% remaining. And these funds have an extra year of obligation. They can be obligated through September 30th of 2023. In that December bill, outside of the funding dedicated to K-12, there was the emergency broadband benefit. I could have a whole tangent on the political gamesmanship that came out of the FCC under the former chairman that was just a slap in the face to what had been bipartisan support for funding to E-rate to address the homework gap. And because he did not support that program, it ultimately was pulled from the package. And instead, we got the emergency broadband benefit, $3.2 billion aimed at broader connectivity in communities. And it's written in such a way that one of the programs at the FCC, administered through one of the subordinates of the FCC, Lifeline, can provide some low-income homes with $50 vouchers to afford internet at home. And so we will commend that as a step in the right direction, but it was an absolute insult to what the proper solution could have been. And I think it's really important to note that when it comes to E-rate program, E-rate, which is the premier program in connecting schools and libraries and has been a the backbone of really catalyzing the work to ensure that students have connectivity at home during remote learning, Joan serves on the USAC board, which is the board that oversees E-rate. So AESA is directly involved in the day-to-day considerations and operations of that program, which will become particularly salient because as we get to the American Rescue Plan, which was the package signed into law in March, that actually included funding dedicated to E-rate. The overall funding through annual appropriations, first time in history that this is being funded by the federal government. It's nearly twice the annual amount being funneled through in one run to help address homework gap. And so it's really fantastic to have AESA position to help inform the work that goes into turning a programmer like that around really quickly. So in the American Rescue Plan, this is the cousin. So it has some similarities to the two sisters, the CARES 1 and CARES 2, but some differences that I want to spend some time on. Overall funding level is just under $123 billion. So if you're keeping track, it's about 10 times what was passed a year ago in March of 2020. The Department of Ed from that 123 reserves $800 million for grants to support homeless students. And then of that, the funds remain to be obligated through September of 2024. There's still the 10% state set aside, but there are additional requirements on what states have to do with that set aside. So it says that at least 5% has to go to addressing learning loss, 1% has to go to summer enrichment programs, 1% for comprehensive after school. And it says that it can use up to 2.5% for emergency needs as determined by the state. So still the same overall set aside for the state, but more clear instruction on where those dollars have to go and identifying priorities for the state to focus on. The 90% that flows to the local level continues to have all of the enumerated uses under CARES 1 and CARES 2, plus some additional language. So there's a clarification that at the local level, your school districts have to use 20% of their share to address learning loss. There's also a requirement that they have to put out within 30 days of receiving funds a plan for reopening schools. There's new requirements under maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity. There's language in here that clarifies the funds can be used for things like infrastructure and renovation and replacement of HVAC systems. We would argue that those were allowable under CARES 1 and CARES 2 and that they weren't prohibited. It wasn't a super relevant point, though, because the overall funding level wasn't enough to either help afford what is a very costly work to overhaul HVAC systems, paired with the reality of, as you looked at your triage list in the early days of the pandemic, there were more immediate needs. And so you were exhausting those funds before you could be in a position to seriously address the work of replacing or updating HVAC. So the last thing I would flag in here, and I got ahead of myself, outside of that pot of funding that's dedicated to K-12, there is a $3 billion increase to IDEA. Fantastic for our annual work and federal appropriations for the program to addressing that chronic shortfall, but a nice infusion for year over year, as well as the $7.2 billion for E-rate. So that's my quick overview on the COVID response dollars available to K-12 schools. I'm going to stop my share so I can see the screen. I'm going to bop into the chat to see if there's questions. Joan has put our email addresses right in the chat. And right now, I just want to turn it over to leave a few minutes for direct questions from you. It can be on anything related to COVID. We're also starting to see, believe it or not, momentum on things that aren't solely related to COVID. What? Super pumped about that. But happy to take some questions on anything you might have or might want to talk about.
Thank you so much, Noelle. So let's open it up to the group. Does anybody have a question for Noelle on any of the information she shared or anything you think she might know something about? She is wicked smart, so ask away.
So Noelle, this is Larry Francois, Superintendent of Northwest Region in our state. The big news in our state today was our state's assessment waiver application was denied. So our Superintendent of Public Instruction has moved testing for this year to the fall. Where do you see the department heading under new leadership around the whole issue of high stakes testing and accountability and balancing all of that with instructional time for kids, et cetera? I mean, just where do you see the kind of the general philosophy heading?
In the context of COVID, I quite honestly see the administration going in the wrong direction. I have no understanding of why they thought in the year that you just lived through testing as normal was anything close to acceptable. I think they unnecessarily complicated this work by saying, we're not going to grant waivers, but instead we'll let all 50 states apply for different things, but we won't really know what everyone's applying for because it's not transparent. And then we'll approve it for some, but not for others, but not be able to really account for why it's good enough for some, but not for others, which is part of what has really been a point of frustration for me. And I'm hearing it from state execs because California and DC essentially were granted permission to run alternative assessments or make it essentially optional. Well, provide that flexibility to all 50 states. The Department of Ed should not be picking and choosing states one over the other. I think you were asking about more broadly, though, the push for testing. And I think this administration is not going to do anything to relieve the number of tests that are administered. First, we're going to need to get to the reauthorization of AESA to do that. Now, technically, AESA reauthorization was due in 2019, but we have to get through IDEA, and we haven't even started that. And as a point of reference, I think it's really important to remember, it took 8 years to get AESA done. As a fun fact, AESA reauthorization from No Child Left Behind started the same month that I did at AASA in August of 2007. And that reauthorized bill was signed into law on December 10th, 2015. Over 8 years. We haven't even started IDEA. And so to have a substantive conversation about reducing the number of tests, you would either need a standalone amendment that would open up the bill, and that's always a contentious issue because once you open up the bill, you open up the bill, so it essentially becomes a complete reauthorization. And the Democrats aren't going to be the ones to reduce the amount of tests. They are the ones that are pushing, in fact, for towing the line and carrying the same number of tests. I think the department did the right thing by waiving accountability, but in the long term for their discussion on assessments, I think they totally buy into the fact that statewide standardized assessments are essentially the panacea or the silver bullet. And they can be, but I may have only taught for a hot minute, but last time I checked, the definition of high quality tests was not solely defined by statewide standardized tests. There's things called formative and summative and local assessments and portfolio assessments. And to the extent that state and local educators are much more positioned to reflect the needs of the people they serve, that should be something they have more discretion in. So it's a long-winded answer because I'm from DC to say they're not going in the right direction, but that's where we are.
Noelle, there's a question in the chat box about student loan forgiveness. Can you address that? Have you heard anything about student loan forgiveness?
Yeah, so student loan forgiveness, I think, is going to be part of the broader Biden infrastructure plan and might be tied into a second stab at reconciliation. The big headline I saw in passing today on Twitter was that the proponents of completely eradicating or forgiving student debt had very compelling data that demonstrated that if they raised the threshold for debt that was forgiven to $50,000, something like 34 million people would be debt-free. That's a relevant number because $50,000 has been pushed by a lot of the more progressive end of the caucus. And President Biden has been pretty clear that right now he's looking at debt for up to $10,000. So I think you will see a proposal to erase some level of debt. Whatever number they come in at, I think it's fairly certain the overall final package, if it gets through, will likely be lower. And we don't spend a ton of time on the higher ed loan stuff. I can dig in a little deeper if that's an area of interest, but that's my working knowledge of that issue right now.
Hey, Noelle, I have a question about, or not a question, really, it's a comment about what you guys said about ESDs not being included in ESSER funds. Well, we weren't either, but we did go to the state and the legislature, and the House put the ESDs in for $3 million after we created our own ESSER need of state funds. And then we went to the Senate and they did an amendment on their budget and added 3.3 million. So we're waiting for that conference committee our conference group to say what we're going to get, but we're going to probably get 3 million for the ESDs based on, I think, our work.
That makes my little lobbyist advocacy heart totally geek out, and it's a great case study of advocacy in action. The other thing I would consider you talking to your state about is remember how we had the brouhaha, the hot mess over equitable services in CARES 1? They did not do equitable services in CARES 2 or the American Rescue Plan, and instead they dedicated $2.75 billion to private schools. And in trying to figure out how to administer those dollars, they created a program that's called EAMS. Some state agencies are struggling to have the capacity to comply with that, and instead are working with ESAs in their state to offer that capacity or role. So I don't know if that's a discussion you've had with the state. It's this program right here. I'll drop it in the chat. But if someone from your state affiliate is interested, they're actually doing the notice on the rulemaking around implementing this right now. We're doing comments on it right now. But that if there's work you want to do there to help administer that, which would involve the private schools in the areas that you serve, that might be another way for you to engage in the rollout of this program.
Thanks.
And then
Noelle,
I have just checking, is there any other question in the chat? I know we need to keep moving on here, and it's a longer evening for Noelle and Joan. They are on a different time zone. So any final question?
I have one final question. Noelle, Melissa Gomboski, I work for the AESD. One of the struggles that we've had in Washington State is the Title I distribution method used to distribute dollars, and it's really created questions of equity where we have one district receiving significant dollars in federal relief funds and other districts receiving next to nothing. So I'm wondering, I know that it's too late, but was that a conversation? And it's created problems for us in the state.
Yeah, so short answer, yes, it was a conversation. Short answer, it didn't go anywhere. Longer answer, it's still ongoing. So here's what's going on. After Title I, well, let's go back and talk about why they relied on Title I. And the real rub there actually requires you to look all the way back to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARA, of the Great Recession. And you'll recall that those emergency dollars flowed to the local level totally based on state formulas. And what we saw almost immediately was that not all state formulas are created equal, and in fact were inequitable and or not progressive. And in the ensuing decade, studies and focus and academic analysis of these formulas found that some are actually straight up regressive. So it was very clear based on that experience that they were not going to rely on state formulas. I distinctly remember being on the phone with Senate committee staff, and I say, Noelle, we're looking at Title I or Title II. And knowing what we knew about state formulas, I knew we weren't going to get anything in state formulas. So I was just happy to make sure and hear that they were relying on an existing program. But as soon as we got through CARES 1, it was very clear that it created a windfall scenario, right? And we get the push for equity, which is really, really good when you're talking about solutions that are totally about catching kids up and leveling the playing field. But there are elements to COVID response that are actually about equality. Masks cost the same in essentially every school district. And so to the extent that Title I is flawed, which is a tangent I'm going to go on in a minute, there was then a push to say, well, can we do an alternative formula allocation? There was still hesitation to go to the state level. We had started between CARES 1 and CARES 2 saying, well, let's do Title I to state, and then from the state to local level, move most of it via Title I to the local level, but let's allow states some discretion, 10, 15, 25, maybe 30%, that they can move through another state formula. Tried that, shot down. Tried it again for American Rescue Plan, shot down. Update this week, though. I saw a bill that wanted to modify the allocation so that another tranche, if it went through, and keep in mind that only a portion has gone to states, and this would really impact what states could do if they want. They instead wanted it to be based on overall student enrollment census data. And so I contacted that office for two reasons. One, we actually oppose that approach, but two, if I can educate them, maybe I can get them to modify their bill to do it my way. We would be opposed to just straight up population because while we understand there's an equality element to COVID response, it's not all about equality. We do want to see some of the targeting based on need. So I called the office up. I'm like, hey, did you know that the Michigan delegation did a joint letter on this? Did you know that we've had some conversations? Did you know that this is the approach we were looking at? And they're actually going back and reaching out to the states I flagged for them and might tweak their bill to propose exactly what I said. I would not hold my breath that we will get this switch because I just think that people are ready to focus on something else and formula fights aren't their jam, but that's a history there. Speaking of formula fights that aren't their jam, remember 10 years ago when you would hear me talk about the Title I formula being flawed because of number weighting versus percentage weighting? With President Biden's proposal to increase Title I funding by $20 billion, that's more than enough money to fix the formula and hold people harmless. And in fact, today I just printed off my historical report so I can refresh my wonkiness on Title I so we can resume a formula fight. So in your spare time, if you'd like to talk to me about the 4 Title I formulas, I'll be here with my binder full of Title I reports.
Thank you so much, Noelle. And, you know, Joan, too, we so appreciate you both being with us tonight and for all the work that you do to support our state's AESD, but really across the nation. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoy your conference. Stay healthy. Bye, y'all.